Good morning, everybody, and the warmest of welcomes to the 2024 National Aged Care Provider Conference, hosted by the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. I'm Richard Morecroft, and it is my great pleasure to be your Master of Ceremonies for the next couple of days at this very important conference. As you all know, aged care in Australia is right on the cusp of a once-in-a-generation transformation, with the upcoming introduction of a new Aged Care Act, a range of new strengthened aged care quality standards, and a new regulatory framework. And right at the heart of this transformation are older people who have a right to expect that the aged care that they receive is safe and is of high quality. And making sure that they are at the centre of all decisions relating to their care will be the way to make sure that they have a better aged care experience. So, what do the next 2 days look like? Well, there's a practical, there's an engaging, and we hope a very stimulating program of plenary and parallel sessions in store for you. You're going to hear from a wide range of speakers from across the sector as together we all unpack the changes that are coming to best support both your understanding and your readiness. Now, as you've no doubt all seen, the conference theme is getting in on the act, working together for better aged care. Because, of course, it goes without saying, the successful implementation of the upcoming new Aged Care Act will need everyone in the sector to work together, cooperatively and collaboratively. The new Act will translate key recommendations of the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety into law, and it will bring with it a new regulatory model and strengthened aged care quality standards. Now, this will quite simply be one of the most significant changes affecting the sector since 1997, when the original Aged Care Act was first passed. Providers, workers and the Commission will need to adapt to the new responsibilities introduced under the new statute. And this is going to involve working together to understand the reforms and to know what they mean in practice. So this conference provides a very timely opportunity indeed to build connections, to share information and to learn from each other. And that's what's needed to ensure that the reforms are delivered successfully and genuinely do give a better aged care experience for older people. Now, over the next 2 days, you will hear about how the Commission is preparing itself for the reforms and also preparing the sector. And of course, that means older people receiving care, care providers, and care workers. And you'll also hear from various sector representatives on how they are getting ready for the upcoming reforms and on the perspectives that they bring from providers, services, and older people. So we have covered a lot of ground already. Now let's get underway officially. And most importantly, to begin, I'd like to now invite to the stage Ghana and Ngarrindjeri Elder Major Moogy Sumner to welcome us to country, and he is joined by Harley Hall on the didgeridoo. Please welcome them to the stage.
Thank you. Before we do the welcome, I'd like to invite our ancestors here to be with us. My ancestors, your ancestors, wherever you come from. Invite them here to be with you, to sit with you, to walk with you, to travel with you, wherever you come from today or yesterday or last night. invite the mayor to be with you, to be a part of this gathering. Walking deep, through Pakana Mutano, Gayri Mangari, Lemon Gana Ruby. 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 Pakana Mutano, Coron Warren, Pangaring open. Gary Pakana Mutano, Coron Warren, Pangaring open. What I said in my language, I asked the ancestors from the 4 directions to come here and sit down in the land of the Ghana people, the land of my mother. The song was to welcome you and your ancestors here to this land. The words at the end, I asked them to take away any negative energy that comes with us as we travel across the land. Ask them to take that away so that you have a good day here today and tomorrow. Enjoy each other's company, but the main thing is look after each other. And thank you very much for coming. Enjoy yourself.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Major Moogy Sumner and Harley Hall, for that wonderful and very warm welcome to country. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Anika Wells MP, Minister for Aged Care and Sport. And while she's not able to be with us in person today, Minister Wells will officially open the conference on screen.
Hello everyone, I'm Anika Wells, your Federal Minister for Aged Care, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you all in person today. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which you gather today, for you, the Kaurna people, and for me, the Ngunnawal people. Together, Australians stand on the shoulders of 1,600 generations of First Nations people, and that is our shared history. So welcome to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission's National Provider Conference. We are now 3 years into our aged care reform journey, and what a journey it has been. As providers of aged care services, you carry the lion's share of rolling out reform, and I have been impressed by your willingness to engage with us and embrace change. Government can create the legislation, regulations and policies to create the conditions, incentives and legal framework for reform, but it is ultimately up to you, the providers, who to make it happen. By stepping up, you have demonstrated your personal commitment to improving aged care for all Australians, and for that you have my sincere gratitude. A lot has happened in the aged care reform space since the last Commission conference, including our 24/7 registered nurse requirement that is now being met 98.7% of the time on average. An average of 200 daily mandatory care minutes the sector exceeded in its first quarter, and our new finance and operations section, sometimes called Dollars to Care, on My Aged Care to make choosing aged care homes easier than ever before, alongside the star rating system. The star rating system is now just over 1 year old, and it is worth taking a moment to note how effective it has been. During this first year, we have seen a significant increase in the number of aged care homes receiving higher ratings, demonstrating that the large number of aged care reforms that we have introduced are leading to improvements in care quality. There has been a 19% increase in homes receiving 4 or 5-star ratings since December 2022, meaning that 58% of all homes are now rated good or excellent level. These figures illustrate that the star rating system is acting exactly as we designed it to by increasing transparency in the aged care system and incentivising providers to seek better ratings by improving their services. We have established an expert group to support ongoing review and maturation of relevant data, including advising on trends, algorithms, risk adjustment, benchmarks, evaluation and program enhancements to ensure that star ratings continues to be an accurate and useful tool for older Australians and for the sector. We've also increased the minimum award wage for more than 250,000 aged care workers to ensure that the people who are delivering care receive fair pay for their hard work. And we aren't done yet. The reform journey is fundamentally about 2 things: ensuring the safety, respect and dignity within the aged care system, and introducing greater agency for those receiving or seeking care. There are other aspects to it, of course, such as ensuring that people who work in aged care are properly and appropriately supported and remunerated. However, at an elementary level, everything that we have done since coming into government has been in service of these ideals. After all, it is hard to feel dignified when you have spilled something on your shirt and no one is available to help you change. And it is hard to have a sense of agency when you do not have enough information to make an informed choice about which aged care home to move to. Addressing these issues is why things like increasing daily care minutes, introducing tools like Dollars to Care, and access to clinical care to improve the quality of life of aged care recipients are effective, important, and overdue reforms. We've now reached a critical point in our reform journey where we have brought some significant aspects online and are close to implementing the final big pieces, such as introducing the new Aged Care Act to Parliament and rolling out the new Support at Home program. The most significant issue that we are actively working to resolve is how to sustainably fund aged care, not just for this year, but for all years going forward. As our population ages, we cannot expect government to fully fund the increasing demand for aged care from a taxpayer base that is shrinking as a proportion of population. I know that funding question is something that is near and dear to your hearts as providers, and we are working across government to bring you our solutions soon. We need a financially viable system that will allow providers like yourselves to focus on delivering quality services that improve the lives of older people while also attracting additional investment. Sustainable funding will fill in the missing pieces that will allow the remaining large and impactful planks of the reforms, such as the Act, new regulatory framework, and the Support at Home program, to be implemented. Finding the answer to the funding question is why I established the Aged Care Task Force to investigate the issue and provide recommendations. The report is still under active consideration by government, but I can share a few general observations about its contents. The report made some specific recommendations around funding, including the need to ensure that current funding arrangements are maintained for existing aged care residents to provide certainty, especially for those who have organised their personal finances around the current system. The task force reflected on the role of government in funding aged care and recommended that while government should remain the major funder of aged care, it is appropriate for participants to make a reasonable contribution where they have the financial means to do so. For providers, the recommendations support more predictable and sustainable funding in home care, along with increased capacity to cover the costs of delivering services in residential care. We are taking the time to carefully evaluate the recommendations and consider our response. Now we turn to the new Aged Care Act. The new Act is the centrepiece of our aged care reform agenda, and every aspect of it is underpinned by the principles of respect for human dignity and increased personal agency. The Act will introduce a new rights-based care model for aged care recipients to provide greater agency for individuals, new responsibilities for providers, and greater oversight by government. It represents a steep change in aged care in Australia, changing the way services are delivered, introducing new laws to ensure people are treated with respect, and superseding previously separate legislation. We want to ensure that we get this new Act right, and that is why we conducted 2 rounds of consultation, focused firstly on the foundations of the new law and most recently on the exposure draft of the bill. During the recent 12-week consultation, we received 323 submissions, more than 800 surveys, and heard from more than 10,000 people at our webinars, workshops, and roundtables. We have also heard specifically from providers during our regular provider pulse surveys and are making sure that your views are considered in the final design of the Act. We are reviewing the important feedback we received so that we can finalise the bill for the new Act and share it with you and introduce it into Parliament as soon as possible. We also plan to release a consultation summary report soon so that you can see the types of feedback that we received. The reform implementation journey and the pending new Aged Care Act represent a significant amount of change across the aged care system, and everyone will need support to understand what this means for them, what they need to do, and when they need to do it, especially providers. I know you have experienced an extraordinary amount of change already, and I acknowledge that between the new Act and the recommendations from the task force, there's a lot more to come. Reforming aged care is like running a marathon, and it reminds me of some advice that my father gave me when we were training together for a half marathon. He told me to sprint up the hill, and that's what we're doing right now with aged care reform. We are sprinting up the hill. And on the whole, we have cause for optimism about the future of aged care. We are positioning ourselves for excellence and working to build a world-class aged care system that will continue to innovate and improve beyond the bounds of the Royal Commission's recommendations. We cannot do it without you, and I'm gladdened to see so many of you are embracing reform and working with us to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Minister Wells, and great to hear the recognition from the Minister of how important your contribution and commitment are and how important your feedback has also been. I am now very pleased indeed to introduce Janet Anderson, PSM, Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner. Janet was appointed as the inaugural Commissioner in January 2019, having held leadership positions in Commonwealth, state and territory agencies for more than 20 years, working in the areas of health and aged care policy, strategy and planning. So please warmly welcome her to the stage, Janet Anderson.
Thank you, Richard, and hello everyone. A very warm welcome that I would add to those that have already been provided to you. It is really, really wonderful to see so many of you in the room and to know that there are so many others who are watching live. I have a lot to get through, and I was struck when I was preparing that it says open forum. I just didn't want to wanted to make sure there wasn't any confusion between open forum and open season. So when we do get to the questions, you might keep that in mind. It is a very ambitious title, and I make no apology for that, towards excellence. Older Australians do deserve to access an aged care system that delivers safe, high-quality, sustainable care that allows them to live their best possible life. And as the Minister... as the Minister said, with all the reforms being implemented and promised, we're all in the process of positioning ourselves for excellence and working to build a world-class aged care system. and all of us have a role to play in that. So some of the content I'm going to cover includes, obviously, references to the New Aged Care Act as the platform for action, and also be talking about and spending a fair bit of time on the Commission's evolving, refined regulatory strategy, our approach to regulation, and I'm sure that there will be a keen interest about that in the room. We're sharing this with you now as the refined version of what we've been working on for a while, even in anticipation of the new Act. We have access to the same exposure draft that you do, and there might be some who say, well, why now? Why wouldn't you wait? Well, my response is, why would we wait? There's never a wrong time to reach for best practice regulation, and we are absolutely determined not to wait until we have the ink on the page, but to anticipate what is additionally going to be expected of us and what we need to do ourselves to ensure that we are a world-class regulator, which is the promise we've made to ourselves and the promise we make out loud in all of our published documents now. But I want to start where I must with those who access aged care. And this chart says 1.279 million, but that's on any day. It's over 1.3 million easily across the course of each year. And you can see there's splits between residential care consumers, those who are receiving home care packages, and the very much larger number who are accessing Commonwealth Home Support Program services. 85% of people who receive aged care are in those second and third categories of home care packages and Commonwealth Home Support Programs. And I think that's something that we need to pay greater attention to, and you'll see that featuring in some of my other slides. Now, you might say, well, 1.279 million. It's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. It's only just under 5% of the total Australian population. But when you change the denominator to people over the age of 75 living in Australia, it moves to 67%. So over 2 in every 3 people over the age of 75 is accessing Commonwealth subsidised aged care. And that speaks to just how important this is for such a large segment of the community. We then look briefly, and this is a fairly busy slide, but we look briefly at where we find the providers and what sort of services they're offering. And if I can give you a couple of takeaways here. The first is, unsurprisingly, that the services are mapped relatively well against population distribution. So we have around 65-70% of services which are in metropolitan or regional centres. And then if you look down the bottom, you also see, unsurprisingly, that a larger proportion of the services available in remote and very remote parts of Australia are CHSP services. And we know that instinctively, but it's interesting to see it coming out in the metrics. And in terms of providers, a good number of you do more than one thing. You deliver residential care and home care packages or whatever. The largest degree of overlap, again, probably unsurprisingly, is between CHSP and home care packages, and there are 328 on this slide, providers who do both of those. But you can see that it's not omni-channel. I mean, it is omni-channel. We need to be careful not to assume that you are a residential provider and that's what you do. There's a good chance you're doing something else as well, and we need to understand you in that complexity and in that service offer. And then finally, in this sequence of slides, we get to the workers, all importantly. Now, the numbers don't add because there are some workers who obviously straddle different care types, but over 370,000 people, enormous number of people, working in aged care, and also a decent number of volunteers alongside them, as you can see there in those slides. And the vast majority, we have fully 290,000 of that 370 odd, who work in residential care for obvious reasons, because it's a 24/7 service and you need so much more staffing to ensure the safety and security and well-being of the individuals who are in residential care. Now, if we were in any doubt about the relevance and importance of aged care in Australia, this is a really telling slide. Again, self-evidently, as people age, they are more likely to enter residential care. And you can see quite striking the proportions of individuals who find their way into residential care with increasing age. We also know that a greater proportion of older people are now using home care. As the government has released additional packages over a number of years, they have been very quickly taken up, and you can see there that they are being taken up in preference, subtly, to residential care. And we know that not only is our general population ageing, but the number and proportion of people aged 80 and over is increasing very rapidly. And this slide tells you that where we are in 2022-23, you've got the square blue bracket. That same size bracket is translated to the other side of the picture, and that bracket, which is everyone over the age of 80 on the left, is just the proportion, just the numbers who are aged 80 to 84 on the right, and you have that much more on the right, which is almost double. So it is a very striking increase in both numbers and proportion of older people, which of course translates into increasing demand. And what may surprise some folk, but I suspect not those in the room, is that there will be an increasing demand not just for home care, but also for residential care, because it continues to have a place, an important role to play for people who have complex chronic disease and high-level needs for 24/7 care. The rate of growth in the utilisation of residential care is predicted to be lower, but it will still grow, and of course more significant proportions of increase in home care. So, as I said, that level analysis does underscore the importance of getting reform right as well in this really critical service delivery space. The Royal Commission identified the improvements required, and successive governments have been very busy in delivering those, with the current Albanese government obviously doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and the Minister made reference to a number of the reforms that have been introduced by her government. We know, as the Minister also observed, that the New Aged Care Act is the game changer. We've been hearing about it and waiting for it for a while. We know a fair bit about it, both through the consultation documents that have been released by the department, but also, most recently, through the exposure draft. And this is an outline of the things that it is holding out as promises. So, outlining the rights of older people, creating single entry point, a fair, culturally safe single assessment point, support the delivery of quality aged care, and the four that matter most to us: establishing new system oversight, increasing provider accountability through a new regulatory model, and strengthening the regulator. And basically that's what I'm going to be spending a fair bit of time talking about, which comes as no particular surprise. And the point I'd make here is one that I would like you to carry with you through the conference. What we have to go on in relation to the new regulatory model is largely what we read in the exposure draft and the various conversations that we get to have with the department in and around that. But it's not a great deal more than you have access to. So I must admit I have limited tolerance for the, well, we can't do anything until we know line. So don't try it. There is so much that you can do. We're in a very similar situation. But if we down tools until we knew the detail, you would be all over us. You would be so critical of us. The regulator let us down. So we're not doing that, and we don't expect you to do that. There is an enormous amount available to you already. Get out ahead of it. Someone asked me, oh, well, you know, what about the new standards? What if they're changed? If we implement them, we would be wasting our time. Seriously? What, food, nutrition, dining, clinical care? These are unimportant until someone tells you they're important? Give me a break. So, please, be irritated that you don't know more. I'll allow that. But don't allow it to be a break to your own ambition to be the best provider you can be. The regulatory model that's been set out looks on the face of it to be quite complicated. And this slide talks about 4 safeguards: becoming a provider, supporting quality care, responsibilities of a provider, and holding providers accountable. And what I've done is my best job at mapping each of those to the how on the right-hand side. But I got to the end of this slide and I thought, it's not really working for me. I'm not sure that I'm helping the audience to unpack that in a meaningful way. So I went to this. The registration and renewal registration is key, and there will be parallel sessions about that later today, and you will learn more about it. So I'm not going to go into any of this in detail because this sort of format doesn't allow the sort of conversation that I think needs to be had about these concepts and processes. 6 registration categories, which are currently in draft form, and then the universal and category-specific obligations and conditions of registration, which is a whole section in the exposure draft. New governance obligations, strengthened standards, again, the subject of a discussion in parallel sessions today. A complaints resolution process which leans more heavily on restorative pathways and new compliance powers. So it's a fair swag of changes, all of which in their own way will impact you just as they are going to impact us as the Commission. This is a chart that you will see in the parallel sessions. Again, if you're unfamiliar with this, it does deserve study. It is draft. It hasn't yet been finalised, but it gives you a way into understanding the new market entry arrangements. And of course, your next set of questions is, yes, but what's going to happen when the Act is introduced? And that will be covered in the parallel sessions. And then we have also all of the work that's been done so far on the strengthened standards and the implications that they have, which are significant. Again, wait for the concurrent session and lean in and learn and ask questions and share your own experiences. The bit that we have really doubled down on is our obligation to ensure that you are as ready as you can be when the new Act is introduced. So we've taken this role particularly seriously, and of course it's not just about you, it's also about older people and what we can do to assist them to understand what to expect from their care and how we can help them. Providers to understand your obligations, what we expect from you and how we will assess you, and for workers to understand their obligations, what's important in delivering safe quality care and how we're going to assist them to raise concerns, among other things. So we are very determined, and hopefully you are aware of this if you've visited our website and looked at our webinars, to assist in the preparations for the new Act. And we have been aware that there's some work we need to do on ourselves first. So we looked at the way in which we engage with our various stakeholders, and we went to the stakeholders and we asked them what that experience was like. And you and others, consumers and workers and other stakeholders told us. And it was salutary. It was information we needed to hear. And we have worked on our engagement strategy to make us fit for purpose, to assist you in getting ready. So you told us you wanted us to focus on what's new, to tailor our content, to translate the changes into action, to articulate expectations and prioritise accessibility and simplicity. And that's what we have sought to do. We produced draft guidance resources, which we made available in February, which is still out for consultation, and I'm sure many of you have already looked at those. Again, that will be discussed later on today. And we've had some pretty good feedback on those too, and they continue to be works in progress. And indeed, these are some of the products that we released. Again, I'm not going to go into detail, but I do hope you've had a chance to look at least some of them. And a tip for those who haven't, I recommend you start with the framework analysis, which gives you a gap analysis between the existing standards and the new standards. So if you need somewhere to start which isn't too daunting, have a look at that and figure out what's new about the strengthened standards and what you therefore might need to pay more attention to. And continuing the theme of working on ourselves, we've also looked more closely at ensuring we are fit for purpose in talking to particular segments of the market, whether they are providers or consumers with culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, First Nations people, older people themselves and their communities, and rural providers and communities. And we have curated a suite of fit-for-purpose products for each of those audiences. It's still a work in progress. And we are very pleased to receive feedback on those, but so far, so good, because we know this is important to you, and therefore it's important to us. So, to date, it's gone quite well. And the bigger question I want to move us to is, what can we reasonably expect from the new Act? What is the most likely impact of the new Act? Is it going to make a difference? Is it going to lift performance and experience in the way that everyone is hoping? And the answer that I want to offer is, it is absolutely vital, it is necessary, but it is not sufficient to transform the experience of older people in relation to aged care. Now, why do I say that? The Act is a piece of paper. At the end of the day, it's words on a page that Parliament endorses. It only comes alive in your hands, in the work you do with individual older people. So the translation is, at least in good part, up to you. And we stand ready to help. So, let's talk about trust. The Commission exists to protect and enhance the safety, health, well-being and quality of life of aged care consumers. And we aim to ensure, as we publish, that older Australians trust, there's that word, and have confidence in aged care services. So how's that going, Commissioner? Let's explore that briefly. I have a sequence of slides. The first is quite shocking, and I even debated with myself whether I'd include it, but I decided I would because I recall reading it and being stunned. But I think it's important for you to understand that this is part of a larger conversation. This individual may be known to some of you. Dr. Rodney Syme is a long-standing, he's now deceased, he died in 2021, long-standing advocate for what was then known as voluntary euthanasia. And Dr. Syme writes, as we age, we will suffer from a range of crippling, degenerative diseases that can lead to dependency, the inability to look after ourselves, which opens the door to the aged care home. There is no doubt that the vast majority of Australians view such an outcome with horror. He goes on to say, some find the aged care experience to be better than they anticipated, some tolerate it since they have no alternative, but a number rail against it, while a very few end their own lives to escape it. And he goes on to argue that the bleak and devastating anticipated consequences of placement or entry into residential aged care might in itself provide some of the justification for people deciding to access voluntary assisted dying. And I was stunned. That's not the aged care system in which I work. That's not the services that you deliver. But for someone to be able to write that suggests zero trust. And we can't turn away from that. As confronting as that message is, we cannot turn away from that. We must understand that that is a view. Now, there are other views. The nurses, I think it's ANMF, say that aged care providers can't be trusted to uphold the standard of care. We have regular newspaper articles. The Central Western Daily, Journal of Record, is saying that community aged care is still a basket case. And we have the Courier Mail saying it is to our shame when we fail our vulnerable seniors, yet we do fail them in relation to food. And we held a webinar recently on food, nutrition and dining, and Daniela Hillis from the Older Persons Advocacy Network did a champion job as one of the speakers. And I want you to hear what she had to say in relation to one of her friends.
My friend forgot her French cuisine and accepted white bread and margarine because that's what she was getting from the carer that she had. But when I brought her occasional croissant or brioche, she cried with joy. She remembered. She looked at it and she kissed it. Every effort must be made, I think, to find out what the person likes, but we need external help. We need families and friends we need to discover on behalf of people who may no longer be able to tell us. Those nonverbal or those with poor English, but nothing is impossible. I think we must get all those people who really know the person together and liaise with the service providers, prepare a menu of well-liked and well-recognized foods, use communication cards with pictures, or small sample foods, and then the person will be able to smile or say boo.
It's not all totally bleak. We have a journalist writing here, a gentleman moved into a residential service and found the home dispiriting and was forced to live in shared accommodations that often fell short of expectations. But it says further down the article, he moved into a room with ensuite and life changed for the better. And then we have an article in The Guardian where, describing her father's experience in a residential aged care home, Tracy Spicer writes, "The carers were utterly brilliant. During almost every conversation, he, my father, says how much he loves living at the facility and wishes he'd made the decision years ago." And then finally in this suite, let's hear from Joy.
I couldn't really walk anywhere, but now having help has made it possible for me to stay where I am in my home, which I love. It's been a godsend for me.
It's good fun here. I love it. I really do love it. A lot of people think I'm crazy. Oh, fancy saying that. But I do. I've made such a lot of friends since I've been in here. I like to get out and about and be with people and do things. Fizzy, quizzes, music. We have a classical music afternoon. It's great. I'm very, very happy here.
Well, I like to go to exercise classes, and I love the bus trips every Tuesday. It takes you out and you see different scenery and that. It's very, very nice. I enjoy that very much.
Now, since I've sort of worked on the garden and a lot more people are utilising the area, it always fascinated me, just watching things grow and the beauty that they show once they're grown.
So, mixed grill, I think you would have to say. And the data is also presenting a fairly mixed picture. We have compliance findings from our assessments of performance. Residential services has a declining level of non-compliance. That's the blue line. Home services, not as great, and a sustained level of non-compliance, and the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program, similarly, somewhat elevated levels of compliance. And you can see it in these sorts of charts that we publish quarterly, where we have, for residential services, 1 in 7 homes which has some degree of non-compliance. Overall compliance levels not bad, but could be better. And then we come to home services and we have a further distance to travel, where 1 in 3 services is non-compliant to some degree. Moving on to complaints, and I'm not going to go through the full panoply of data here because that would be tedious, but just grabbing a few points to make the case. 5 top issues in complaints I get for residential services, remarkably consistent across quarters, even though there appears to be a declining trend, which may or may not be encouraging, and I think we have to reserve judgment on that, but it's an interesting profile and a very consistent one across years. And then we have new data, and this is for home services, where at face value it's quite striking. It can be alarming and needs to be unpacked and explained, and there is enormous value in us dissecting these numbers and assisting you to understand why this is your experience or whether your experience differs from this. So neglect includes, for example, missed shifts. And stealing or financial coercion can include actions by a family member. We sometimes find that in the data. So these are variables that we need to understand and unpack in order to understand each of those lines, and then what you, as the provider, can understand and do about that in your own backyard. So overall, it appears that we're making some headway, but it's a very mixed picture, and clearly what you can discern at a whole of commission level is different sometimes from the experience of the individual. So I then went to the question about what all this means for us. What does this mean for the regulator? And I started by putting this chart together. People using aged care want care, that is all those things on the left-hand side, and people providing aged care, those of you in the room, want all the things on the right-hand side. And then the regulator and the system governor, being the department, do some of the heavy lifting, as you can see there. Now, the reason I'm not spending long on this slide is because I actually found it quite sterile. I found it very unsatisfactory. At the end of the day, I'm not sure what it said to me. It looks terribly adversarial or oppositional. We've got people who don't seem to want the same thing. Well, so what? So what I did was step back and take the larger view and start with what unites us. What brings us together is our shared goals. All of us, wherever we are in the system, want a great aged care experience for every older person. We want a thriving aged care sector, because without providers there isn't a sector, and we want a regulator that has impact and delivers value. So if you start there, that then leads you into some interesting terrain. Have a look at this. This is the first of the slides that I developed on this, and it seemed to work. So how do we build trust and confidence? How do we earn trust and confidence? In order to be trusted, you have to be trustworthy. What does that mean? So it seems to me that if we have a provider who understands their obligations and undertakings and commits to deliver against those, and you have an older person who has needs and preferences which are understood and has expectations which are delivered in their experience, then the delivery and the experience will match into a high trust equation. If there are shortcomings on either side, they won't match at the bottom and you'll have low trust. So this was working better for me. I thought, okay, this is more dynamic. This gives us a place to go. And then I wonder whether I could extrapolate. And I can. Replace provider with commission, replace older person with provider. We have obligations and undertakings. You have needs and preferences. If we can each deliver and have the experience that we expect on those, we have high trust. And similarly, in terms of the relationship between the commission and the older person, same deal. Obligations on our part, expectations, hopes, ambitions on the consumer's part. If we can perform as we are required to, and if we can deliver against the expectations that the consumer has, we develop the high trust relationship. We earn the high trust relationship. So that's where it seems to me the rubber hits the road. And we are all joined in a quest to earn high trust, because that is where high quality, safe, enjoyable care resides. And of course, it's not just about the regulator, as I've demonstrated. We all have a part to play, because you cannot regulate a sector to excellence. You simply cannot. We can't do it all ourselves. We rely on you to do your part. And we also know that trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. So I want to talk with you about the regulator's role in filling the bucket and plugging the holes. We start with the best practice principles for regulation that are published by the Department of Finance. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but these are worth just clocking. Continuous improvement in building trust, that word again. Risk-based and data-driven, and collaboration and engagement, 1, 2, 3. And David Tune, in the independent review he undertook of the Commission in 22-23, was deeply informed by those 3 principles. And he had a very thorough look at my Commission, at every aspect of it, and delivered 32 recommendations. Now, the government hasn't offered a formal response to those recommendations, but if you wanted to take a punt about whether that has slowed me down, you might lose your money. We took those 32 recommendations and we put them into 6 work streams, and you can see them there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 3 are externally facing, the latter 3 are internally facing, building our own capability. And we have incorporated those 6 work streams into our corporate plan. So in fact, it's already a published document, we just haven't said it out loud. If you want to go and check out our corporate plan online, you will find that those 6 work streams are interpolated in the commitments we make out loud about what we're going to do across this financial year and of course carrying forward in 24-25. So we have already nailed our colours to the mast. We certainly await the government's final view on some of the funding-informed recommendations, but there's so much else that we've gone about implementing because we knew that time was of the essence and we needed to be the best possible regulator in anticipation of the new Act. Now, I'm going to spend a bit of time on that first of the 6 work streams, the curiously framed operational functional maturity. We have spent a lot of time refining our regulatory strategy, and I've already talked a bit about it. Now, this slide deserves a closer analysis than we have time for, but I will give you a brief orientation. Preventative regulation on the left and responsive regulation on the right. They are not discrete and separated and independent. They are part of the larger whole that is the Commission. We double down on prevention in order to avoid failures of care, in order to stay on the right side of risk and assist you in managing service delivery in a way which delivers the results and outcomes that consumers have a right to expect. So if you go down to strategic purpose, prevent, where possible, future failures in care and improve sector performance for targeted issues. That's the strategic purpose. And then you can read through what we do and the outcomes that we achieve from it. But effectively, this is about education and targeted campaigns, specific monitoring to assist you to know where your risk lies and to deal with it before it tips over into non-compliance. But then on the other side, we have responsive regulation. And this is where we get a little more serious about non-compliance and how it translates into risk of harm. And the strategic purpose here is reduce risk and manage non-compliance and deter future non-compliance. And so again, what we do is supervise risk and failures of care, engage with providers, manage non-compliance, with the outcomes that we focus on unmanaged risks and stopping harm. Now, that's not going to mean a great deal, that's just words on a page for the moment, but I'm going to just move quickly through some of the explanatory text, as it were. What we expect, this is the simplest possible version, what we expect from providers all the time are 3 things. A genuine partnership between you and the older person, meeting obligations and, at the same time, reaching for high quality care, and thirdly, looking for opportunities to improve. Doesn't sound hard, does it? I know how hard that is sometimes. I know some days that feels almost out of reach, but that's what we expect from you all the time. Now, last year I introduced the famous regulatory diamond, and it has proven its worth. It has found traction. It is generally well received by providers who find it relatively straightforward to understand. But what we came to appreciate over the last 12 months since we released it is that we need to be clearer and more predictable and more consistent in relation to the bit south of the green. What does non-compliance by the provider actually result in from the Commission? So we gave this a lot of thought, and recognising the need for predictability and certainty in the way that this diamond doesn't quite deliver, we iterated. And now what you see in that bottom left hand is a sequence of words that together create our new mature regulatory strategy. Let me take you into it. 100% of providers, everyone in this room and everyone watching online, has or will have, this is a work in progress, a supervision status. The vast majority, everyone is subject to surveillance, as the 100% indicates, and then a much smaller proportion will be the subject of targeted supervision, active supervision, or heightened supervision. And as you can see, the gradation is assessed degree of risk. So what do these mean? So surveillance is where we watch, monitor, gather information about the entire sector in order to understand where risk is present and how it's currently being managed. And those who dwell in surveillance have assessed low risk, lowest risk. As you move from left to right, you are increasing the risk gradient. Targeted supervision we use to manage specific problems. It might be infection prevent control, it could be restricted practice, it might be food, nutrition, dining, whatever it looks like. Active supervision is getting pretty serious. Active supervision is where we have high-level assessed risk, and you will know it. We will be engaging with you, and we will be requiring you to remediate with alacrity. And then the far right is heightened supervision, where nothing much is going right for you at the moment, and you are absolutely at severe level risk. You are being case managed by the Commission, and you will know it, and it will feel really uncomfortable because we are genuinely concerned that older people are being placed at risk of harm, if not experiencing actual harm. So another way of coming at it is through this. Surveillance is our ongoing oversight of all providers. Excuse me. Supervision is what we activate where we find risk or failure to act. And then enforcement excuse me, is where we find unacceptable failures of care that adversely impact older people. 1, 2, 3. I think it's fairly straightforward. If I could give you the most simplified version, it is, the premise underpinning the whole model is that the greater the assessed risk, the greater the level of supervision. So surveillance looks like this, where we hoover up all of this information about the sector on a daily, quarterly, annual basis and ad hoc, and we put it up against everything we know about a provider and a service, and we do take two routes. You go up the top, and we understand the service and the provider. You go down the bottom, and we understand the sector and the programs. We do trend analysis, we do risk analysis, and each of them lands on the right-hand side with an engagement with providers or a provider about the way we see you. Where it's systemic, we will put something out which is for whole of sector. Where it's specific to a provider, we will obviously be engaging with you. Now, when you get to the supervision levels, as it were, every provider is allocated supervision status. The four categories have been mentioned, and the assessed risk will determine our intensity of engagement. So you have that arrow going up between the two right angles. Supervision status can and will change as the risks change, including the actions taken by providers, and a provider can move up or down the supervision triangle. It's not a one direction, you're going down, down, down. Absolutely not. And guess what? The choice is yours. You get to decide how energetic and focused you are on managing the risk and the non-compliance. And we will watch and we will celebrate each effort you make if it's moving in the right direction, but you will certainly know if we're unhappy and if you're going in the wrong direction. We're not naive. Zero risk is not a possibility in our sector. We know that, absolutely we know that. So what we also do is tell you what we expect you to do if something goes wrong. And it's three relatively straightforward concepts which are very well known to you already. In the first instance, we expect you to fix the problem, remedy. Then we expect you to work with those who've been impacted to restore their trust and confidence. And then we expect you to double down and make sure it never happens again. Remedy, restore, prevent. So that's not rocket science. That's not an unfamiliar set of concepts, but what we're trying to do is to crystallise them in a way that it makes really good sense to you and the people who work for you. Just briefly on enforcement action, it is separate from the action we take on non-compliance, and it's very deliberately so. Enforcement action is about applying a consequence where there has been a failure in care that adversely impacts an older person or people. And we do it to send a clear signal to all providers that we exist to protect older people, and we take that job exceptionally seriously. We're also doing it to deter future non-compliance. So it's a very serious act on our part, and it is deliberately about applying a consequence. And I might add, this is not and never will be a punishment. It's about accountability. So in summary, if you take it from a risk perspective, low risk of harm, we're watching. We may undertake targeted supervision depending on the campaign approach. Medium, high or severe, there will be active or heightened supervision, and the choice we make will be determined by the actions you're taking. Are you fixing the problem? Are you restoring trust? Are you ensuring it never happens again? If you are uninterested or even resistant to doing those things, it won't go well. What we expect all the time, as I said earlier, genuine partnerships with older people, meeting obligations and reaching for high quality care, and constantly looking for ways to improve. And when it goes wrong, moving quickly in the way that I've set out. Final set of slides. That left me with, okay, that's an interesting place to land. Where do we go from there? And I knew I wanted to close by bringing us back to where we started, to talk about the consumer. And I was doodling on a page and I was saying, well, what matters to older people? And I started jotting down a few things. I said, well, actually, this is a list about what matters to human beings. It's not just older people. And I came up with things which would be well known to you: personal purpose, meaning, value, self-determination or agency, relationships, so love, belonging, inclusion, and hope, or an optimistic anticipation about what the day might bring. All those things are really important. And I thought, well, I could riff on that. But then I read a book which was written in 2014 that many of you may have also read, by Atul Gawande, called Being Mortal. And I think he nails it. I really think he nails it. Whatever the limits and travails we face, we want to retain the autonomy, the freedom to be the authors of our lives. This is the very marrow of being human. So to keep shaping the story of our life in the world until the very end. So the new Act, as far as I'm concerned, will bring this to life. We'll create this as a truth in our universe, in our world, and that's a wonderful thing. But it won't do it just because it's words flat on a page that Parliament has said yes to. It will do it because you and we recognise and work towards that shared goal. If we close the gap between the promise and the performance, the commitments that we are working under and the way in which we deliver against them, and we close the gap between what older people expect and what they receive and what they experience, if all of that comes together and we have a merger, we have a high trust setting which has been earned, not because we think we deserve it, but because we have earned it, because we are in fact delivering high quality safe care and an awesome aged care experience every single day. And it is about earning trust. Trust is earned when actions meet words. So hopefully some of that's resonated and you'll take it away and think about it some further. What can you do to build trust? And it's not empty rhetoric. It's what you do, the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the engagement you have with the people to whom you're providing care every single day. And we stand ready to help you shine. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Janet, and great to have such an information-rich beginning with such practical analysis of the present and indeed the likely future. Now, we're going to be taking some questions from you very shortly. As I mentioned before, there's the opportunity to do that via the app, and very shortly I'm going to be presented with an iPad with your questions coming through. There is also the opportunity, should anyone want to come to the two microphones which are in the corridors, the stairways in between the seats. So please, if you do have a question, do make your way to the microphone if you would prefer to do that. Janet, thank you very much. There have actually been a couple of questions that have been submitted already, although I can see that the iPad is travelling. Thank you very much indeed. And we have, it's great to see the app working so well, because there are a number of questions that have come through already. So Janet, if I can throw these questions to you. The first one that comes up here is, what is your approach to standardise approaches or views on quality taken by different assessors?
Let's start with the easy one, shall we? Fair enough too. I get it. I really do get it. We have put into place over the last 18 months, my senior team has been diligent to a fault almost in understanding the level of frustration that some of you have about differences in team application, in team knowledge, in team process. And we are better for it today than we were 18 months ago. And those of you who have undergone assessment or audit more recently are giving us that feedback. So we are now doubling down on internal quality assurance to ensure that all of our quality assessors, who are uniformly trained and registered and overseen and supervised, are also supported to obtain and maintain a skill set, but also a way of working which is consistent between sites and between different visits to the same site. Now, we're human beings, and there undoubtedly will always be some variation, but we have a standard approach, and I can assure you we work it hard, and we have all sorts of sampling methodologies in place now where we look at reports, we look at draft records that team members provide and so on. We look at the feedback that we receive from providers post-audit. We take all of that on board and we use it to continuously improve what we're doing. And we always welcome feedback.
Thank you. Now the next question is one which has got an enormous number of expressed interest, but it's a very practical one. As I mentioned, there was a great deal of richness of information in your presentation, and the question really is, can everybody please have your slides available to review? If you would like to respond.
The answer is yes.
Great, no doubt the mechanism for that will be passed on to you in due course. Next question, when will eligible advisors or statutory managers be used in this new, more positive regulatory approach? Will the approach be similar to previous ones?
Eligible advisors and statutory managers, I wasn't sure that they were consonant. In any event, my answer is the same. I am going to eschew the temptation to get into the detail. These are all matters covered in the exposure draft. I know all of you are desperately keen to access some of the what does that mean sort of information. We've obviously done some thinking, but I really can't be categorical, and I am going to be very measured in the sort of information I can share with you, because I absolutely don't want to mislead you on some of these critical elements of the exposure draft, which may, even as we speak, be undergoing revision following the consultation process that the department undertook. So I certainly understand the keen interest, and I'm not ducking for cover. I'm simply saying we need to allow a little more time in order for that to land, and then we will all be able to interpret it, and I can give you some more information.
Next question, how will the Commission ensure that governing bodies, in other words, board members, it says here, are sharing the commitment to implementing reforms and not remaining driven by profits this may be in conflict with executive management?
Ooh, I'm not going to step between executive management and the board. Currently, we have Quality Standard 8, which does the heavy lifting in this space. Under the new standard, it's probably Standard 2. But the point that I make generally is what we look for is the evidence on the ground. What do we see when we go to a service? What do we read? What are people saying about the service? What do we hear through interviews? Now, if everyone and the data supports the view that everyone is sharing with us, which is this is a great service, then what's happening between the board and the executive is of far less interest to us. But the minute we find that there's some dissonance in that service, or we find an absence of obvious policies, or people are not able to articulate fairly standard processes of care, or we find a drift significantly away from best practice, then we start asking questions. Why is this so? Why are we seeing this here? What is missing? Who's not paying enough attention? And that may well lead us in the direction of the board. So it really is about what's happening on the ground, what is the nature of the care that's being provided, is it satisfying the standards as they currently exist and will exist in the future, and what is the experience of that care, any anomalies there, and we'll go looking further.
Thank you, Janet. Our next question is, with so much negativity regarding aged care, and in brackets it has here Royal Commission, financial irregularities, various SIRS, delay with Act rollout, and constant staffing issues all around the nation, what is the Commission doing to picture a positive picture of the aged care sector?
Well, I could talk at some length about that. I think today was part of our effort. It's not all bleak. And what we see and hear constantly through personal experiences is people loving accessing home care or Commonwealth Home Support Program or residential care. It is not a universal negative. I think, I'll be honest with you, and I don't know who asked the question, but it is partly about mindset. How you turn up as a leader is instrumental to the way that your organisation ultimately ticks, to the culture that you cultivate within your service and the way you go about delivering care and achieving outcomes. I choose to turn up with a positive mindset. The job is not easy. The regulator's role is deeply controversial depending on who you're talking to and what they're asking about. But we have a job. We have a purpose. We have a mission which we actually share. There'll always be negativity. Lean towards the positive.
Richard,
Thank you very much.
Richard, I wonder if I might add to that question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that there was somebody down by the microphone. Yes,
I should have worn something brighter. I do apologise.
That's right.
My name's Tracy Burton. I'm from Uniting in New South Wales ACT. And Commissioner, I really appreciated your presentation this morning, and I'm really glad that you did include the reality of that reflection that some people have enormous fear about coming into an aged care home. So I'm wondering about what role the Commission does or could play in helping to build trust. So with the community, the broader community. So when data, for example, the one you showed there about people in home care services being robbed, the stealing statistic, or indeed in residential aged care, the statistics about physical abuse of a resident, how might you be able to lean in and help educate credible, influential media, people like Anne Connolly from the ABC, for example, because when we try and say, hey, you know what, that stealing statistic equally relates to family members, it's not that our staff are stealing at that rate, but the data gets weaponised, and when we try and actually explain it, we're seen to be defensive. So I'm wondering how the Commission could help in that important journey of rebuilding trust with the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Janet.
Thanks, Richard. Your question is premised on the assumption that we don't work at that now, and I'd have to disabuse that. We are very energetic in trying to get positive messages out, but it is the media's decision as to what they pick up. We don't have any control over the coverage that is offered. We constantly put out the facts and the way in which we understand the facts, and they are either ignored or they're used selectively to create a particular story. Now, you know, that's the media, that's the world in which we live. But we also, and increasingly, are looking to put out other information which is interpretive. So if you may be familiar with our insights reports on serious incident response, and we have had good traction where we provide a user's guide too. So unreasonable use of force. We've been able to demonstrate that 85–90% of those instances of unreasonable use of force in residential care are between residents, individuals living in that service. Now that takes us down a whole other avenue of intervention, as it were, in terms of restrictive practice and behaviour support programs and so on. But those are the sorts of things that we can and will continue to do and seek to get those covered, because talking at the media is a fool's game. We won't get the returns there that we're looking for. We need to be cleverer than that, and we need to be more energetic in publishing interpretive information which allows people to understand data in context and provides the diversity and complexity of the picture that a single chart or series of charts fails to do. I absolutely understand the question.
Thank you. And what will have to be our final question for the moment, time has raced on, but our final question for this session: the guidance resources published for strengthened standards are great. Do you have any view on when the strengthened standards will come into effect? Is it likely to be 2024 or 2025?
Oh, that's a sneaky way of asking when the new Act's coming in. The new strengthened standards will be introduced at the time of the new Act. As you heard the Minister say, there is absolute beavering away by the department at the moment to consolidate all of that consultation on the exposure draft, to provide advice to government on where there might be amendments suggested to the exposure draft in order that they can get the bill that they're happy with to introduce to Parliament. And the Minister is beyond impatient for that to occur, I can assure you of that. So a lot of people are beavering away really heavily to get that sorted, and the new standards will be introduced when the new Act is passed by Parliament.
Thank you, and indeed, thank you, Janet. A great session to set the scene for the sessions to follow. So will you please thank Janet as she leaves the stage.